I am really, really scared of what's happening right now. But moreover, I'm scared of the future. Change in general just makes me uneasy, and flexibility has never been my strong suit. I have grown much better at rolling with the shifting tides, but as a person who values the tranquility of routine, transformation makes me nervous. As a 12-year-old boy riddled with the side effects of new hormones and clinically diagnosed with severe OCD, the change occurring within me was apocalyptic. I ended up doing what many kids would do in this circumstance, immersing myself in art to cope with my wild brain chemistry. I found The Who, The Kinks, and David Bowie, the last of which had a discography that carved out a very special place in my heart, and one song in particular that simultaneously filled me with a sense of dread, anger, and catharsis. Track number 2 on 1971's Hunky Dory, Oh You Pretty Things.
Oh, you pretty things. Don't you know you're driving your mamas and papas insane? Oh, you pretty things. Don't you know you're driving...
I listened to this track at least 24 times before I even gave the lyrics any attention. The drums, the guitar, the piano, it was so intoxicating and seemed to stay glued to my eardrums for days. I remember my older sibling driving me to middle school. I hopped in our mom's van and immediately put on the song. After it ended, they remarked, "Do you know what this song is about?" That's when I began listening to exactly what Bowie was trying to say in this very flamboyant and repetitive pop rock song. I began poring over the lyrics, and what I discovered was fascinating. Bowie begins this track by placing us in the mind of a man waking up, arising to find that the sky out his window has split open, with a hand extending from the heavens. However, this is not a revelatory moment, but a dreadful one. The world he knew has changed forever and will never be the same. Bowie then speaks of the specifics of this revolution, how the next generation will be an angry wave of children that will sweep over the world, pushing out not only the older order of things, but the older people as well. The parents, who Bowie calls mamas and papas, an obvious reference to the 60s band of the same name, will desperately try and convince themselves that this new generation is distinct from them, that they are not the progenitors to this, that they are not responsible, that these are strangers. However, Bowie implores them. They belong to you. You are responsible for what is coming, especially if it is your own destruction. Bowie's tone belies the horror of the subject matter. He speaks almost religiously about these children, describing them with the splendor and worship reserved for gods. However, he makes clear through his perspective that he too will be cast aside. The line,
"The earth is a bitch, we finished our news. Homo sapiens have outgrown their use,"
gives us the only real sense of abject personal surrender the narrator offers. So there's a lot of strange symbolism floating around here. Eerie iconography. Bowie is well known to have some very cryptic lyrics, these two being my favorite.
"I've got eyes on my backside. They see electric tomatoes on credit card robbery. It's on America's tortured brow that Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow."
However, here we find something much more consistent than his usual borderline unintelligible poetry. Anyone who has dabbled in philosophy has perhaps begun to pick up on some of the themes here. This whole song is but a vehicle to speak about one of the most famous Western philosophers ever and his most well-known and most horribly consequential set of ideas. Friedrich Nietzsche is perhaps the most written on and debated Western philosopher of the 19th century. His ideas have inspired countless academic careers and are highly controversial. Now, Nietzsche was born in Prussia in the mid-1800s and would go on to write works concerning nihilism, amor fati, and the eternal return. But his most famous and most pertinent works concern the death of God, the Übermensch, and the will to power. These are the cornerstone themes that Bowie chooses to cover in Pretty Things. Now, I'm not here to give you a philosophy lesson. I am not interested or qualified in an exercise like that. But I will give you some necessary background. Nietzsche believed that due to the declining nature of religiosity in modern society, i.e. the death of God, there would be a vacuum of foundational meaning in people's lives. A vacuum that would need to be filled in order to evade the destruction of civilization. This new meaning, he believed, must come through a sort of mechanism called the will to power. Nietzsche describes the will to power in his seminal work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He defines it as the insatiable desire one has to pursue self-discovery through personal growth, a thirst for greatness in one's own goals, an internal motivation and unyielding pursuit. Upon this undertaking, one ascends to the ideal state of humanity, surpasses the conventional limitations of societal norms, and moves beyond the need for a traditional moral or religious framework. He dubbed this final state the Übermensch, or Superman. These new citizens of Earth provided a rope over humanity's abyss. Now we reflect back on Oh You Pretty Things and can clearly see the inspiration. Bowie draws from Nietzsche's language directly with a line that mentions Homo superior, an English translation of the Übermensch. What's interesting is that the opening of the song that mentions God does so almost hopefully.
Crack in the sky and a hand reaching down to me.
Perhaps the hand reaching out to Bowie's narrator is in fact the last grasp of the dying God Nietzsche describes, as the following line makes it clear that this is not a jovial moment.
All the nightmares came today, and it looks as though they're here to stay.
The entire song, in fact, is full of confused optimism and pessimism. The pretty things are the new golden generation coming to uproot the old order with an intense and nightmarish purpose. The last verse we haven't really touched on in this very short song is the one where Bowie describes the books, our collective knowledge of the past.
Written in pain, written in awe by a puzzled man who questioned what we came here for. All the strangers came today, and it looks as though they're here to stay.
Perhaps this man is Nietzsche himself, a confused philosopher struggling for meaning. Will the next waves, our descendants, answer these questions? Well, not in any recognizable way. These strangers will be unknown to us, unknown to their parents even. So, why all this dreary subtext? Why be so negative about Nietzsche's philosophy? Well, if you're a student of philosophy, or even just a student of history like me, you probably had alarm bells start ringing the second I began describing the Übermensch. Nietzsche's ideas were famously co-opted by various political groups in the early to mid-20th century, the most notable being the National Socialist movement in Germany. Over time, Nietzsche's ideas of a will to power and a pursuit for excellence and domination by a homo superior has become almost inextricably linked to the Nazi ideology of Aryan supremacy and the goal of racially purifying the West. The connection runs very deep. Adolf Hitler himself sent a wreath to Nietzsche's sister for his grave and had a bust of the philosopher commissioned to be placed in his house. During World War II, Hitler gave The Will to Power, a manuscript of all the unpublished work Nietzsche left which his sister had compiled, to Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini. While there are aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy that lend themselves to this kind of belief system, the truth is that Nietzsche himself would have been appalled at the political legacy his ideas created. Nietzsche was against nationalism in general and against anti-Semitism specifically. He hated racial discrimination more than many of his peers at the time. But in the end, philosophers leave the ink on the pages. They leave their ideas and can't determine how they are co-opted or interpreted. So, why am I making a video about Bowie and Nietzsche? Bowie's dead and Nietzsche's dead. So what? His ideas have inspired Nazis. What does that have to do with anything? Is this just another video essay on World War II from a white guy? And, come on. It's not like there are any more Nazis around anymore. All the Nazis are dead. Right? So, the truth is that this video was originally going to be on Bowie and his writing alone. I was going to remark on his brilliant ability to use allusions and metaphors, his harmonies and tone shifts, and even my interpretation of his words. However, as I dug into the lyrics and thought more and more about this new age beginning, the nightmarish scene of young and unrecognizable hordes coming to power, I couldn't help but think of what is unfolding all around me every day. I'm 26 years old, usually considered to be on the older side of Generation Z. I have ascended into early adulthood and began to take stock in what it seems my chronological cohort has decided to do with their time. And to my dismay, it has come to my attention that a startlingly high number are fascists. To be clear, this is not a video on fascists who have been in power or have had or currently have license to act with full-fledged authoritarian animosity. This is a video on those who aren't even old enough to run for local governance and who are nevertheless the future of our body politic. Now, there's so much confusion and willing obfuscation as to what certain terms mean or do not mean, but all I can say is that I will refer to these people how I want to and show you what they believe. You can make up your mind whether they are fascists, far-right, authoritarian, or Nazis. So my generation. Generation Z, the fun-loving, labubu buying, matcha drinking, AI obsessed, dab pen sucking, rain bet generation. Now, before I start, I'll say, I know that whenever one attempts to critique a generation, they are invariably looked at as an old man yelling at the proverbial kids on their lawn. I understand that since Socrates' time, people have been decrying the wave of change that comes with the youth growing up. This isn't a Gen Z problem per se. Instead, it's sort of a new fusion of popular culture and politics that affects every age group, but in my opinion, has led to an extremely noticeable rise in reactionary beliefs in those aged 15 to 30. Simply put, there are way more Nazis my age than there have been in a long time, and the tenets of Nazism are much more mainstream than they've been in 2 generations. But these pretty things, as Bowie calls them, didn't come out of nowhere. The economic health of this country, the need for new community spaces, and internet culture are, to me, contributing factors as to why more and more teens are growing comfortable LARPing as Pinochet. In 2008, the new golden era of American neoliberalism was ushered in as a community organizer from Chicago, backed by an almost $800 million campaign, won the presidency. For many in my generation, this was remembered as an incredibly historical moment that marked the path forward towards real racial justice. Barry O was about to bring us peace, prosperity, and equality. Unfortunately, the next 8 years were filled with further political polarization, the corporate consolidation through mergers of nearly every aspect of commercial life, and thousands of innocent Middle Easterners being vaporized by flying death robots in countries we have not declared war on that most Americans couldn't spell. Libs weren't feeling shaky at all, though. The status quo was maintained with, of course, the wonderful rainbow window dressing that made us feel like it was the 70s in New York again. The Democratic Party grew fat, inflexible, and incredibly complacent as the cost of living continued to climb and wages remained stagnant. Layoffs and shifts in the energy sector left thousands jobless in the Rust Belt, destitute and deserted as the top 1% rebounded massively after the Great Recession. Billionaires built yachts with fucking theaters in them. The promises of equality only went so far as the donors were comfortable, and the donors wanted nothing to do with serious economic reform. Then in comes Donald Trump off that escalator in 2016 with a brilliant strategy to eviscerate his competition and turn the race into reality TV.
Little Rocket Man, Rocket.
I remember being in high school at the time, and my classmates and I would meet up at lunch and talk about the race. Looking back on it, I realized at the time none of us had this burning hatred of him or this desire to see him get thrown in jail. The idea of him getting elected was too ridiculous to be sincere about. The motto was, enjoy the ride, this guy is fucking gross and awful. It's like an interesting car accident. It was at this moment, however, that I think many of my peers began to show interest in him more than his appearance as a xenophobic dumpster fire. They began to truly appreciate his sentiments. To be clear, the Nazis I refer to in this video are not these kids. young Turning Point USA types. One could dub them as such, and I will let you argue about it in the comments, but you'll see the people I'm talking about. Donald Trump, of course, did claim victory, and I think the few peers of mine who were conservatives were elated. Then came the first Trump admin. To pretty much everyone's chagrin, Donald Trump did not restore the great fabric of our economy after the American carnage of the Obama years. He governed like a conservative, slashing taxes and raising defense spending. Job creation was slower than expected, and wage growth suffered. What he did do is pump the political atmosphere with toxic gas and tore off nearly all of the subtext and guardrails that had obscured the worst impulses of bigoted assholes in this country. It was okay to say fag. It was okay to say the R word and the N word. Speak with your chest puffed out, unafraid of backlash. The innuendo of the past, the quote-unquote Southern strategy, which had quartered Republicans with a dog whistle of race realism, was thrown out. It simply wasn't needed. As Bowie said, Homo sapiens had outgrown their use. The politicians of the past were stiff, calculated, and above all, boring. Mexicans were rapists, and transgender people were pedophiles. Young people, especially young boys, felt empowered by the freedom to drop the filter in public. Their future was fucked. The billionaires had made sure of that. But wasn't it nice to at least dominate the culture before we all drowned? Homophobia, racism, sexism, xenophobia, these sentiments already existed deep within them as a result of ignorance, insecurity, or malice. It was finally okay to let them jettison to the surface, to say what you wanted to say all the time to anyone. So-called cancel culture would begin to rise as a natural and appropriate countermeasure to this, but that's another topic for another day. These young men were being absolutely fucked by the establishment the same way Obama, Bush II, and Clinton had. But at least they got to feel dominant. This Nazi rise is to some extent the natural reaction to realizing that Trump too is not going to help you. But at least he acts the way you act in private and public. It was time to shout from the rooftops. It was time to find like-minded individuals. It was time to hop on the web. Okay, so in reality, Nazis, white supremacists, whatever you want to call them, have been on the internet since its inception. 4chan, Reddit, 8chan, Newgrounds, Stormfront. The corners of the web have housed the most deplorable opinions imaginable since this noise first pierced our eardrums. The difference was, before 2015, people felt that the need to couch their views was a bit more necessary. If they wanted to talk about black people, they would use the word thug, and if they wanted to talk about immigrants, they would specify that their grievances were with those who had entered here illegally. There was a pushback to feminism in the wake of the online scandal Gamergate in 2014, but frankly, the discourse centered more on feminism, it seemed, than on every individual woman. I do not mean to say that it was a glorious Steinem paradise, but there was less violent misogyny in the mainstream. Well, there's never been a time in which queer people have felt comfortable in the United States. Prior to 2015, gay people specifically had captured major cultural empathy. If you were to go online and publicly call someone a fag, you were seen as a loser who was most likely overcompensating for some gnawing homoerotic feelings. Today, however, discourse has majorly soured.
You don't know anything. You're just a woman.
You can still be homophobic.
Oh, and what are you? Homosexual?
As aforementioned, the doors of naked rhetoric have been flung open, and the corners are no longer where these sentiments are housed, but on the front page of every social media website. Nearly all the CEOs of the social media companies have decided to ease up on nearly any community guidelines and instead let serious right-wing sentiment run rampant. I wonder why. But the source of this, to me, is more sociological. I believe that coming out of the COVID era, the younger chunk of my generation had the development of their social skills majorly warped. I was in rehab at the time and was 20, so I had a very different experience, but I can say I've talked to a lot of younger people who feel this way. I mean, essentially, a ton of preteens were locked in their rooms, deprived of their tight-knit social bonds with classmates and romantic interests, bonds that they had just started to figure out how to make, as they watched their grandparents die slow and painful deaths through iPad screens while hearing about the richest Americans making out like bandits. At the same time, prominent right-wing voices were loudly broadcasting the idea that the liberals in government were untrustworthy and entirely to blame for needlessly exacerbating the crisis. So is it any wonder that once these kids were thrust back into the world, they were desperately looking for community and a way to strike back against the system that crippled their childhood and fucked up their brain development? They ended up finding these communities on X, Facebook, and Instagram, like-minded adults and kids who were horrified by the state of the world coming out of the pandemic. Pure and utter hopelessness about the general state of things abounded in these spaces, and I distinctly remember watching two different reactions to this. There were those who took this opportunity to truly reassess the capitalist framework inherent in our lives as Americans and the horrifying Cronenberg-esque marriage between money and government. These people joined unions, pushed left-wing thought online and at protests, and began to independently research class consciousness in classical and contemporary sources. The other group, mainly white men, but to be quite honest, also men of varying racial backgrounds, ran the other way and began following the words of some of the most despicable people on the internet. I'm going to name some people that hopefully you've never heard of, but if you're online to the point where it cripples your mental health like me, you'll probably be familiar with. For the older generation watching this, I hope this exercise is informative and haunting. Just to be clear, when I share quotes or opinions, I am not taking things out of context. None of what is said or espoused here is humorous. Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate is an online streamer and influencer who focuses on manhood, women, and wealth. He sells courses on how to be a better man and a successful entrepreneur. Here's a handful of his quotes.
My heart goes out to all of you. You know, I'm kind of thinking we should bring the Nazi salute back.
What, speaking out against the Dems?
Speaking out against the Jews. If you speak out against the Jews in America, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So every single country has their off-limit topics. So there's no such thing as free speech anyway. Europeans, most of them believe that they should be replaced by third worlders, or that when they get killed by third worlders, it's just part and parcel of living in a big city. In a white country, race is important because ignoring race spells the end of the white man. I'm not saying white people are better. I'm not a white supremacist saying that they're superior to other races. What I am saying is, if you allow a lot of people into your country who are not white, it is the end of the white man. The Jews did it. The Jews did it.
10.8 million followers on Twitter. Paul Miller. Paul Miller, also known as Gypsy Crusader, is an internet personality and video chat streamer who speaks on topics in the news and specifically race politics.
TikTok. Don't put me on no TikTok. Bang, bang, niggas.
You're already going on, you fucking animal.
I'm a fuck.
What?
Finally, a stupid talk to. What's going on, Blackie? I make and I sell Nazi propaganda. That's what I do for a living. What do you do for a living?
I trade stocks. So let's
the entire length of human history, there has not been one thing that these have accomplished. You stupid? They didn't even have the wheel. They had no spoken language. They had nothing. If it was not for colonization, and which they are still doing right now, despite colonization, why don't you want to answer the question? Are you too busy like spreading fucking horrible diseases all over the place to answer a simple question?
Like, get a life, get a job.
Yeah, why don't you fucking go get an AIDS test?
It became acceptable when this fucking retard didn't realize that we have and fucking destroying this country. That's when it became acceptable. It was awesome, and he tried to save us.
Yeah, we're bringing back. Fuck you.
194,000 followers on Twitter. Myron Gaines. Myron Gaines is a podcaster who started off speaking mainly on gender politics, but has recently shifted to focus almost entirely on promoting fascist ideology.
Hillary
Hitler's right about y'all niggas. These dreidel spinning, yarmulke wearing, kibbutz inhabiting, genocidal fucks. Fuck you, motherfucker. I can say what the fuck I want to say, you dreidel spinning faggot. When Hitler came into power, he wanted to rid Germany of Jewish influence because he understood that Jews don't necessarily care so much about the host country. Rather, they care about each other and then having their own country. I'm reading Mein Kampf right now. I'm a free thinker. I like to look at all different things. I don't believe a lot of the history of World War II. He definitely brought Germany back from the brink of collapse. I think Hitler was widely misrepresented. I don't think he's as evil as history says he is. She fucking said the mustache man was a visionary. So y'all gotta go over there and like that shit and support it when she says that type of shit. The Jews declared war on Hitler first. The Holocaust is the base. If we debunk the Holocaust, the whole fucking house of cards comes crashing down.
343,000 followers on Twitter. Nicholas Balinzi, better known as Sneeko. Sneeko was an IRL streamer who, in recent years, shifted his streams to be almost entirely about his own brand of anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynistic, right-wing conservatism.
Hitler, whether or not I understand why you think he's evil, I don't think he was a good person as well, but to not understand him, he's also a human. So you also need to understand that perspective if you're going to use that as an argument. You can't just shut him out and say, nope.
Die aber überall hinbringen! Die können keine...
The same no matter how old they are, they're still girls.
Yeah.
There's 50-year-old women who are lawyers, career, all this. There's still girls that want to go and submit to them.
And women by nature are mentally chaotic and mentally ill. Do you know how easy it is for a woman that's in love with you to get a new husband after you get slaughtered in war?
968,000 followers on Twitter. Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is the man who really got me interested in making this video. He has been a podcaster and live streamer for many, many years, but exploded in popularity right before Trump's second term.
We're saying, hey, we want a Christian government. We want a Christian government. We want a majority white country. We want nationalism. We're okay with authoritarianism.
That's why we need dictatorship. That's unironically why we need to get rid of all that. We need to take control of the media or take control of the government and force the people to believe what we believe or force them to play by our rules and reshape the society. And what it would look like to build a society based on our distinct worldview. It looks like a society where women don't have the right to vote. And it looks like a society where boys and girls get married as teenagers and start having kids, and they don't use birth control, and they don't use contraceptives, and they have big families and a high birth rate, and it looks like women wearing veils at church, and it looks like women not being in the workforce. So that means that banning gay marriage is back on the menu, banning sodomy is back on the menu. If I take 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies and Cookie Monster has 15 ovens, working 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years, how long does it take Cookie Monster to make 6 million batches of cookies? The math doesn't quite seem to add up there. I don't think you'd result in 6 million, maybe 200 to 300,000 cookies.
Enough with the Jim Crow stuff. Who cares? Oh, to drink out of a different water fountain. Big fucking deal.
933,000 followers on X. This list is by no means exhaustive, and I could very well have listed 20 more content creators with relatively large followings that frequently deny the Holocaust and implore their audience to harass Jews and non-whites. Most of these creators are in their early 30s, with Sneeko and Nick Fuentes both being the youngest at just 27. Fuentes recently got a bio article written on him that debuted on the front page of the New York Times. There seems to be a slow realization by mainstream corporate media that white nationalism is no longer a fringe ideology, but a cornerstone belief of many who will take over the Republican Party. Your children know who these people are. Many of them may watch them on a daily basis. Preteen boys are seeing these men flash on their TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter feeds, with sound bites featuring the Great Replacement Theory or George Soros. I am now flashing the screen with other tweets I found just by spending 5 minutes on some of the accounts I mentioned and being suggested other like-minded individuals' feeds. At the risk of overstating the point, here is a clip that circulated a couple years ago of Sneeko meeting one of his fans.
What'd you say? Fuck the woman! Fuck the woman!
What? No, wait.
Sneeko.
We love women. We love women. We love women.
But not like transgenders.
Yes, sir. We love everybody. No.
All gays
Yeah,
should
fuck
die.
gays. Yeah, merch. Preach.
This interaction is truly horrifying. The child responds like a talking points robot, and while he may not quite understand the sentiment behind those words, the power these influencers have to create toxicity in adolescents' brains is undeniable. Some of you may be thinking, isn't this just trolling? No, I am well aware of the dark humor and edgy trolls of the 4chan golden era. I can honestly say that there's a different tone present here. Old trolls gave you the sense that they didn't really care about one political stance or another, and lacked pride in the consistency of a passionate viewpoint. This new wave is entirely too sincere. If you were a moderate, a liberal, or even a conservative who remembers the world before 9/11, you may be watching this and feel horrified. You may feel as if all normalcy has been lost, that the paradigm has unrecognizably shifted. But as Bowie so plainly stated, this generation belongs to you. Those who came before are responsible for the conditions that propagated this disgusting rise. I feel that our brains are also part of the conditions that set the field for this cyberreich. It is a certifiable fact that our attention spans are suffering due to social media and electronics in general. Technology has changed every aspect of our modern world, very much including how and when our neurons fire and our ability for critical thought. Many independent studies have confirmed that the more time we spend on screens, the more our attention and focus suffers, as does our ability for deferred gratification. We want easy and satisfying input with minimal output. We want dopamine and serotonin with no regard for how they are obtained or why they are excreted. Just look at how gambling has swallowed up the entertainment industry in the past 5 years. Essentially, these fascistic schools of thought lend themselves to this lack of deep and complex comprehension. Throw in the fact that money is to be made by these online Nazis, and that the more shocking and outlandish lines you say, the more attention you attract, and suddenly you've created a perfect environment where kids are looking for easily digestible truths that assist them in funneling their anger in the direction of those who've seemingly wronged them, and a group of entertainers more than happy to provide. It is much more difficult for left-wing, even radical left-wing creators to break down the complicated mechanics of race politics, class politics, and gender politics, being careful to use somewhat respectful language and doing their best to detangle the narratives spun by generations of misinformation and propaganda, than it is to engage in fascistic reactionary dialogue. Just say, you deserve to be angry, the gays, Jews, non-whites, and immigrants are the problem. As long as you keep that sentiment as your North Star, you can easily build out the facade of a belief system. There is also an added bonus, that you now belong to a very secret club, an ancient cadre of political thinkers who are the real truth tellers. The only ones who know the story of the world, know the extent to which the white man has been wronged, the extent to which he has taken advantage of. You are special and unique. You are the Homo superior Nietzsche spoke of. You are aware of the greatest cabal of all. After seeing how QAnon affected conservative politics, we can all acknowledge how powerful conspiracy communities can be as a social force. These new Nazis are no less skeptical of historical narratives. They seemingly swap class antagonism with racism as the true fight for survival. Your future is yours for the taking, not from a ruling class, but from the Jews who have unleashed a horde of undesirables in your country. It is your job to fix this. It is your job to take the world back. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the geopolitical elephant in the room regarding young Nazis. That is, the continued genocide of the Palestinian people by the Jewish state of Israel. As of writing, the Gaza Health Ministry reports that over 68,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli bullets, airstrikes, and forced starvation. On September 16th, 2025, a UN commission finally confirmed what we've known all along, that this isn't a war, it is an ethnic cleansing. While I do not think this is the largest contributing factor to the phenomenon I've been speaking of, Young American men seeing Israel use the weapons and billions of dollars the U.S. sends them to commit unspeakable acts of war and protect an ethno-state does cement the narrative already espoused by creators like Fuentes or Gaines. Israel is simply a confirmation of what the Jew has been like for thousands of years. Scheming, bloodthirsty, and able to manipulate the white man to part with his money against his better interest. Trump being in line with nearly every other president since JFK on Israel just reinforces the fear of total international Jewish influence, as even the most right-wing president we have had for some time is under their spell. We simply have to acknowledge that these actions reflect on Jewish people's global identity. That, of course, is a heartbreaking realization for anti-Zionist Jews like myself. This genocide is being utilized to make all Jews, regardless of their thoughts on Israel, feel unsafe. This is done by online Nazis who hate Jewry much more than they care about Palestinians, or any non-whites for that matter. So as Bowie so elegantly prophesized, Nazis are here to stay, nightmares and all. What do we do? How do we move forward? Well, far be it from me, a history teacher in his mid-20s, to try and lay out a path. I will speculate and say I believe the path forward is what it has always been: organization and education. I don't know how many of these people are too far gone, will never be reached. But I can say there is a chunk that can be made to see that their enemies are those that own the property, not those who operate it with them. Bowie's song and Nietzsche's philosophy seem to be somewhat predictive. Nietzsche believed specifically that as modernity progressed and God became less of a source of meaning, people would need to find a sense of belonging, a fire to drive them. The philosophies of fascism and Nazism, while disgusting, abhorrent, and violent, are certainly potent enough to fill that void, to make the younger generation feel like the crumbling world has a simple problem and a simple solution. The earth is a bitch, and the pretty, unweathered, ignorant mass that are Gen Z fascists will continue to drive us insane. But I do divert with Bowie on one point. The inevitability of this march into madness is not assured. We can show them that lasting meaning comes through self-liberation and the liberation of the masses.